Hi there, it's Samantha McGolrick, and you're in the right place if you're a director or executive leading safe and healthy work in the boardroom or C-suite. Today's topic may be a bit more interesting to those of you who work in the financial sector, because on the 1st of July 2018, Australia introduced the Banking Executive Accountability Regime, or the BEAR for short. You might ask why someone in health and safety would be interested in the BEAR. Well, that's a good question. The fact is, there are a lot of similarities between the intent of the BEAR and obligations imposed on officers under Australian and New Zealand work health and safety legislation. For one, the BEAR is an enhanced accountability framework for persons in director and senior executive roles. This is a similar intent of the work health and safety due diligence obligations, which emphasize corporate governance responsibilities of officers and supports improved leadership that contributes to a culture of safety and the recognition that effective risk management starts with a commitment to health and safety from those who control and manage the business or undertaking. But there are clearly some differences between these two pieces of legislation, and I think there are some requirements under the BEAR that could be well utilized in the management of work health and safety, particularly the requirement to draft accountability maps and statements and to defer executive variable remuneration. And this is where I want to focus today. So let's get started. So who specifically is the BEAR and WHS due diligence obligations targeting? Well, APRA has defined trust as a cornerstone for a financial business and states that while the financial sector might be trusted to be safe, it is far less trusted to do the right thing. And at the moment, that form of trust has taken a severe hit, which has commercial implications and will likely make the financial system less efficient and competitive over the longer run than it might otherwise be. The BEAR is intended to strengthen the accountability obligations of the banks and their directors and senior executives, and to impose enhanced consequences for being in breach of those obligations. Just as WHS legislation introduced the role of an officer, the BEAR has introduced a new definition referred to as an accountable person. Again, similar to the WHS legislation, this role includes directors, including NEDs, the CEO, and senior executives. The BEAR is quite prescriptive in this area by defining the roles and/or specific responsibilities for all those who are considered an accountable person, whereas work health and safety legislation uses the definition applied in the Corporations Act to define an officer, which lends itself to being a bit more vague after you identify directors and senior executives. For the purposes of this audience, both definitions include directors, the CEO, and more than likely the senior leadership team or executives. On a side note, while officers under work health and safety legislation have personal liability, it does not appear that the same applies to accountable persons under the BEAR. Regardless, both pieces of legislation provide neither party with a safe harbor. For example, the BEAR specifically states that there will be no insurance to indemnify accountable persons, and my advice from health and safety lawyers is that those considered officers under work health and safety legislation should not look to indemnify themselves from consequences of breaching the Work Health and Safety Act. Rather, the courts do not look at this favorably. But note that insurance is not my area of expertise, so please seek advice if you're concerned by this. Okay, so now that we've taken a look at who is accountable under both pieces of legislation, I'd like to turn your attention to the two requirements under the BEAR that I think would be useful to apply to the management of work health and safety. Let's start with the benefits of accountability maps and statements. The BEAR requires that accountability maps must name all accountable persons with their responsibilities, reporting lines, and lines of responsibility. These need to have enough information to identify an accountable person for each of the prescribed responsibilities, which includes CROs, CFOs, CEOs, heads of internal audit, head of HR, COO, CIO, head of anti-money laundering, and others carrying out management of all or a significant part of the business activities of the bank and its subsidiaries. In addition to accountability maps, the BEAR requires that statements must be drafted for each accountable person, which contains a comprehensive statement of the part of an aspect of the bank or subsidiary's operations for which the accountable person has effective management or control, and the responsibilities of that accountable person. From a safety perspective, many organizations would already have some form of accountability map in the form of an organizational chart, position descriptions, and some may have documented roles and responsibilities and accountabilities in a specific procedure or guidance material. We want to take those separate pieces of information and pull them together into one document that gives officers a clear picture of how roles, responsibilities, and accountabilities across the organization align to safe risk management activities and ensure assurance practices. This would be a foundation document in your work health and safety governance framework. So when drafting your WHS accountability map, rather than having the accountable persons drive the structure, as under the BEAR requirements, I suggest letting accountabilities for safety, risk management, and assurance drive who is included in the mapping exercise. It's imperative that officers understand with granularity and transparency where responsibilities lie for these two overarching activities, because these activities are two fundamental aspects in your safety management system and governance framework, and align directly to your personal liability under the work health and safety due diligence obligations. So you want to speak very clearly and consistently across the board and executive team as to how these activities are managed within your organization. The mapping exercise should also clearly identify the role of your health and safety management team and the role of management. You should not see the health and safety team as responsible for or accountable for ensuring risks are managed or anything of a similar nature. You should see your health and safety team in more of an advisory or partnership capacity, or as a designer as such. They design or develop systems in consultation with the business so the system is fit for purpose. They advise on risk management and interpreting the legislation. They can be responsible for bringing together data for you to monitor and measure. And they can advise on strategic initiatives for your business or individual division. But they are not the ones with authority to change the behavior and actions of the workers or to ensure implementation of your work health and safety management system. That is the responsibility of management. Some of the assurance and risk management activities you want to see outlined will include: how does the business identify its hazardous events and critical risks? For example, you might develop bow ties to determine your hazardous events. So who is responsible for designing those? And who is consulted? And who will sign off on the controls for critical risks? Where is that information documented? i.e., a risk register. Who is responsible for maintaining the risk register? Who needs to be consulted when designing the risk register? Who are the process owners of, for example, procurement or development activities? Who is notified, or if we use the RACI definition, who is informed of critical incidents? Who conducts investigations? Who is responsible for setting performance measures for their business unit? Who should assist them or consult with them on the indicators? Who collates the information? Who reports to the regulator should there be a notifiable incident? The accountability map that I'm suggesting would look fairly similar to a RACI matrix, or a version thereof. For those of you who don't know what a RACI matrix is, it's an acronym derived from the 4 key responsibilities most typically used, which are those who are responsible, those who are accountable, those who need to be consulted, and those who just need to be informed. You may want to develop just the map, or if that gets a bit too big or cumbersome, you may want to support the map with accountability statements similar to the requirements under the BEAR. Once you're done with safety risk management and assurance activities, you could broaden it out to include other elements of your safety management system, such as who needs to be involved in designing your work health and safety strategy, who needs to be consulted and informed in its design. But I suggest you start with safety risk management and assurance activities, because they are easily aligned to your due diligence obligations. The second requirement I find of interest under the BEAR is a requirement for senior executives' variable remuneration to be deferred for at least 4 years. KPMG has advised that variable income will include any amount which is conditional on the achievement of objectives and any retention bonus, however described. They expect that it covers all short-term, including deferred and long-term incentive awards, including awards contingent on continued service only. The Australian Government consultation paper on the introduction of the BEAR states, In recent years, there has been growing community concern regarding a number of examples of poor culture and behavior in banks and the financial sector generally. There have been too many instances where participants have been treated inappropriately by banks and related financial institutions. Interestingly, the government is moving forward in recognizing that executive incentive schemes are not contributing to a culture of trust and integrity in the financial sector. They should be put on notice, though, that poorly designed incentive schemes have been implicated in numerous industrial disasters, including the BP Texas City oil refinery and Deepwater Horizon. And to a degree, one could infer from the recent Dreamworld coronial inquest that incentive schemes, or at the very least overall financial performance of the organization, influenced the safety risk management activities in the park, or lack thereof, which resulted in the death of 4 people on the Thunder River Rapids ride in 2016. Research also suggests that executive incentive structures tend to motivate a short-term orientation to organizational performance and potentially pose a strong disincentive to spending on health and safety. Just as APRA suggests that depositors in banks need trust that their deposits are safe and available when needed, so do workers and the public who expect that a workplace is safe and healthy for them to enter or work in. Like any incentive scheme, the purpose is to align individual behavior and performance to the interests of the organization. But when designing incentive schemes, whether they include safety performance-based outcomes or not, designers of these schemes must look to whether they encourage behavior that supports the effective management of health and safety, risks, particularly critical risks, and motivate intended behaviors. The adage, "what gets measured and incentivized gets managed," is particularly relevant when looking at executive incentives. Now, we know that short-term incentives can be deferred, but long-term incentives by their very nature are deferred. But why I want to focus on long-term incentives is because they generally make up the larger bonus and are tied exclusively to financial performance, which predisposes senior executives to putting profit ahead of safety, even if they do so unknowingly. In fact, many of you have likely heard the recent initial findings from the Dreamworld coronial inquest that include the blatant removal of repairs and maintenance and cutbacks enforced across the park some 7 months prior to the incident. It has been identified that although the company was up in revenue, it was down in profit, and that was a driver for ceasing all repairs and maintenance, and likely impacted on lack of resources, which has also been identified in the inquest's early findings. Now, let me be clear. The coronial inquest has not identified executive incentive schemes as a precursor to the tragedy that occurred at Dreamworld, at least not at this point. However, we are seeing, as I just mentioned, that financial performance of the organization drove certain actions. We also know that the ex-CEO of Dreamworld's parent company, Ardent Leisure, received their long-term performance rights even though they were at the helm of the company when the tragic incident occurred. We may be able to infer from this that health and safety was not a key component of determining overall business performance, as it is not in many organizations, hence why the parent company ex-CEO received their long-term performance rights even though there were fatalities on their watch. As suggested earlier, it's likely that this is because overall business performance is the primary driver of long-term incentive plans, and health and safety is generally not included in what determines overall business performance. So in terms of the bare requirements to defer executive variable remuneration, I completely agree. But from a health and safety perspective, there is still the question of what is the trigger to release the variable remuneration, and does it include a health and safety component, particularly in terms of long-term incentive plans. Now, this is just one of my arguments as to why health and safety needs to be considered in the design of long-term incentive plans. I haven't even gotten into how health and safety outcomes may not be realized for years after the decision has been made in the business, and therefore must lend itself to a long-term perspective. But that is for another day. So with that said, I hope today has helped you in your quest to know what to ask and when to act. When you're finished watching, I would love to know, have you identified health and safety in your long-term incentive plans? If so, let me know in the comments below. And if you like this video, be sure to like it and share it with any others who you think may benefit. If you want to get a regular dose of what to ask and when to act, hit that subscribe button. And if you're interested in diving further into content like this, head over to my blog on smsafetysolutions.com.au. While you're there, be sure to sign up for the newsletter to get notified of more good stuff on health and safety governance and leadership, promotions and other insights, tips and strategies, or free resources that I only share via email. As always, I hope I have contributed further to you knowing what to ask and when to act. Thanks for watching. Until next time.